for Dr. Schaefer. There we go. We are recording. I'm going to share screen. For the record, Dr. Schaefer, whenever you watch this, I cannot stand behind this podium and talk. So I'm not going to be in your picture. I'm sorry. I'm just going to talk. Oh, but I'm also going to pull this thing over and look at it. Okay. Is this about everybody? I have no idea. Is this about everybody? Yeah? Okay. Do what?
80%. We have a lot of students that don't show up at all.
Good enough. That's okay. Good enough. So I am Amy Hagerman. Dr. Schaefer asked me to
Hello.
Hello. Oh, okay. I thought you were like, wait, no, don't start. So my name is Amy Hagerman. I am one of the faculty here in the AGEC department, although you may not have run into me up to this point because I am not one of the teaching faculty. I am a tenure track assistant professor in the department, but my appointment is extension and research, which means 75% of my time is spent out working with farmers and ranchers on the issues that are most critical to them. So what you're going to get from me is more of a practical perspective of agricultural policy. These are the kinds of things that I'm talking to farmers and ranchers about in the state. These are the kinds of things that I'm tracking. Happy to see some familiar faces in here, so I'm not totally lost in this. So here's how we're going to kind of go today. The first few minutes, we're going to talk about Farm Bill context. This may be review for most of you, but I may pull out maybe some different aspects of it than you've talked about up to this point. So I think it's worth reviewing. And then because we had a little more time than I originally thought we did, we're going to actually watch the opening statements of one of the hearings on the Farm Bill that happened yesterday. So you're going to actually hear the members of the House Ag Committee talking about critical issues related to international trade and food security in the world. Why do I think this was a really interesting and a worthwhile piece to listen to? And yes, it's about 20 minutes long, 25 minutes long. It's because it wraps together all of these elements of agricultural policy that you guys maybe have been talking about or that you will be talking about. All of the topics that you hear people talking about right now are all going to get kind of wrapped up together. And how do these things all fit together within the context of policy development? And it all comes around to this. He wanted me to talk a little bit about the policy environment in Washington, D.C. And I think that rather than just hearing me speak about it, it's better if you actually hear them in their own words saying what the environment is and what the priorities are in Washington, D.C. right now. Because honestly, there's been a little bit of a switch that's flipped in the last few months. And what has happened in the last few months that you guys think would maybe cause that switch to flip a little bit? The war. And so you'll even hear several comments around that and what that has meant in terms of the tone and the conversation that's happening in Washington, D.C. right now. But we're going to start off with just a little bit of policy context. So you guys may have already talked about this, authorizations and appropriations. So what's the difference between an authorization and an appropriation within a policy context? Did you talk about this yet? I don't know. So, okay, authorizations. This is what allows a program to be established, continued, and amended or modified. It's a prerequisite to appropriations. A program cannot exist at the federal level without an authorization behind it in some way. Appropriations are the actual budgetary authority that allows that program to happen. These are two separate pieces that occur. So you can have an authorization that passes at the federal level, but if you don't have any appropriations that go along with it, that program is dead in the water. It's not going anywhere. It cannot be implemented. So one of the reasons that I like to bring this up is because if you guys ever notice all the conversation around the Budget Act every year, the Federal Appropriations Act every year, that's because it's way more than the federal budget of the different agencies. It also includes appropriations for a lot of programs that have been authorized in other bills. Okay. Permanent versus multi-year. Not all pieces of federal legislation are permanent legislation. More often than not, particularly in agriculture, we have multi-year or single-year authorizations. So authorization that is permanent remains in effect until it's changed by Congress. Can you guys think about, particularly if you're talking about the history of agricultural policy or the history of farm bills, can you think of a permanent piece of legislation that has just been amended many times that completely changed the face of it in agricultural policy that you've talked about? So how about the Agriculture Act of 1938, right? The first farm bill, the one that when a farm bill expires, we revert back to it. That's the permanent legislation. Another example would be for crop insurance, 1980, our permanent legislation that is amended for crop insurance dates back to 1980. On the other hand, you have these single or multi-year pieces of authorization. So it's a limited time horizon. And I'm specifically going to bring up the 5 fiscal years here because that's the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill is a 5 fiscal year authorization. And all of the amendments that occur in that Farm Bill are in effect for those 5 fiscal years. At whatever point that Farm Bill expires, unless a new Farm Bill has been signed into law or has been amended to extend until a Farm Bill can be passed, we revert back to the individual pieces of permanent legislation that are associated with it. Mandatory versus discretionary. I think this is one that's really critical and it's very hazy. A lot of people don't realize when a particular piece of a particular authorization is mandatory versus discretionary. Mandatory, the members of Congress who vote on that are saying that this spending is going to be tied to a specific authorization. It's going to be capped to a specific amount in a specific time horizon. They're very prescriptive in how that money has to be spent. Discretionary, they're just providing a guideline and a basis, and then they assign a specific authority to come in and say that. The most common one you'll see in agriculture is the Secretary of Agriculture is authorized to create a program that. Okay, and so then that would just give USDA the power to create a program. Now, this is a little tricky here though too, because sometimes it can be stated that way, but it's still mandatory because they're saying you have this much money, it has to be spent on this, and it has to be spent in this many years. But USDA, you can decide exactly the details of how it's spent, right? That's still mandatory spending. So what is a farm bill? It's an omnibus bill. Yep. Yep.
Just for like a minute.
You're welcome. So a farm bill is an omnibus bill. That means it puts all of these different, almost looks like they shouldn't be sitting in the same bus programs on the same bus to move us forward as an agricultural economy. Let me know when you're okay for me to move forward. You good now? Anybody else? No. So it's going to package several bills together. It's a spending authorization, but it also includes appropriations. So one of the reasons the Farm Bill is so complicated is because it includes some authorizations, some appropriations, some authorizations and appropriations. And sometimes when you have appropriations alone, it's just hearkening back to that original permanent bill that has been passed. So it's a really complicated bill. But one of the things I appreciate about the Farm Bill is that it captures the complexity of how interrelated our agricultural economy and our food value chain is in the United States. It actually tries to address all the different facets of that chain. And it's a really complicated chain. So it establishes multi-year programs, it makes changes to permanent programs, it sets spending limits, and it also creates authorizations for discretionary programs, all in one bill. Does anybody know how long the 2018 Farm Bill was? How many pages? 2,700 pages. And that's not all the language. That's just all the ways it's amended the original language. Okay, so it's a massive piece of legislation whenever it's all put together. Yep.
You said that we just keep amending, and that is just kind of backtracking. But you said that we just keep amending the 1938 Farm Bill Why do we do that instead of passing entirely legislation?
So you just identified one of the pieces of debate that happens every single farm bill cycle. And part of the reason for that is because if a new permanent piece of legislation was passed, is there still a motivation to go back and review that over time? And so part of the justification for keeping it at the 5-year amendment timeframe is that it creates an imperative for Congress to go back and review those programs every 5 years. Whereas if you just created a whole new piece of permanent legislation around that, you lose some of that imperative to go back and review it. And that means that other priorities could be placed ahead of it.
Couldn't you do both? Oh, well, I guess not. Could you do both? In the, like, if just the terriblest of all terribles were to happen, and for some oddball reason, Congress wasn't able to go back and amend and review in that 5th year, and then we had to revert back to 1938, that'd be terrible, instead of we just had to revert back to 2018.
So what they do is they just put extensions in. So when that does happen, what they will do is they'll allow just an extension of the 5 fiscal year bill for 1 year or 2 years, or however long they think it will take them to pass a new amendment. That's how they address that concern. It doesn't mean that a farm bill has never expired, which has technically meant we reverted back. That actually happened in 2018. So the farm bill expired on September 30th. We actually lost access to several programs and reverted back to old programs. What USDA basically does is they put the brakes on everything until a new farm bill is passed. And then the new farm bill was passed December 20th. So basically for 3 months, we didn't have a farm bill in 2018.
Did that create a lot of problems?
Yes, some, particularly for certain kinds of programs. So Conservation Reserve Program, is anybody familiar with CRP at all? It's a land set aside program. That program is one of the ones that isn't in any of the permanent pieces of legislation. And so it actually, the authorization for CRP expired. So they had to halt all new CRP activity for that 3-month period. But they were still able to continue contracts that existed. So I guess basically what I'm telling you is that in a short term, it doesn't create a lot of chaos because program timelines extend forward a little bit from usually through the end of the calendar year for a lot of programs. And so they can just use existing contracts and existing pieces in place until they expire. If we had rolled over into the new year, it would have caused a lot more problems. Yeah, so like dairy is another one that's a big example because dairy doesn't have a piece of permanent legislation that's any newer than 1940, I think. And it would have gone back to the old dairy quota system at the expiration, but most of the dairy marketing coverage, dairy margin coverage contracts extended through the end of the calendar year. And so it was only a problem if we had rolled over into a new calendar year on the expiration. It's all in the weeds, the details, the devil is in the details on things like that. 2,700. Oh, it's more than that by the time you include all the USDA documentation. It's complicated. Understatement. Okay. So we're just talking about this 2018. We just got a new farm bill, right? So why are we already talking about the next farm bill? Basically, from the time a farm bill is implemented, we begin the process of getting a new farm bill in place. And so this is the timing of some of the most recent farm bills when they've actually passed. You'll notice there's a bigger than normal gap between the 2008 bill and the 2014 bill. That's because it took almost 2.5 years to get a bill that time around, versus in 2018, the first bills were introduced in May and June, and we actually had a bill signed by December 20th. So it was a much shorter time frame at that point. And I should probably have 2022 in the star here, but right now we're beginning that process of actually taking us forward into the next farm bill. So this, what does this process look like? So 2019 through the end of this year, we're having listening sessions. They're doing analysis. They're writing reports. about how well Farm Bill programs have actually operated in this time period, for this 4-year time period. Really 3 years, but some of the programs in 2018 were retroactive. So we do have some 2018 data. And we're going to listen to the front end of one of those listening sessions in a few minutes. Then in 2023, question mark, maybe it will happen in 2023. It's scheduled to happen in 2023. We are going to have new versions, proposed versions of the Farm Bill that's introduced in both the House and Senate Agriculture Committees. Now, why do you guys think we have to have versions of the bill introduced in both? So these two committees have different authorities. And because of the breadth of programs that are in the Farm Bill, you get different versions because the two sides of Congress have different authorities, but then also these two agricultural committees have different authorities. And so you'll get a version of this. They'll go to a full floor vote. If a version passes in both the House and the Senate, then we have to reconcile the two versions. So they will go to a joint conference committee that contains members of both. They will actually put together the conference report that is the final Farm Bill, in essence, is that conference report. Then it goes back out to a full floor vote on both sides, pass or fail, then it goes to the White House for veto. So just again, a little bit of history. Does anybody know what the margin was by which the 2018 bill passed on both sides? So it's 80+% voted for the Farm Bill on both sides. 2018, not exactly the most cohesive year among our Congress. Why do you guys think we had such strong support for farm bills that they passed by margins that wide, margins that far exceed any other bill that passed in 2018?
Wait, so in 2018, it passed by an 80% pass?
Yeah.
Oh. Recession?
Plus. No? No?
Was it because the House and the Senate were controlled by mostly the Republican Party?
Actually, they were almost evenly split.
They were almost evenly split? Okay.
So you actually had one party in control of one party in control of the other, and they were almost evenly split. So which is why every other bill that year had such a close margin to actually pass. So one of the reasons, and this is a point that is argued every year, why do we have nutrition programs and farm programs in the same bill?
To pull in more votes.
Bingo. You have combined the rural and urban interests into a single bill, which creates an imperative to pass a farm bill. Another reason is that not a recession necessarily, but we did have very low commodity prices that year. And so there was a lot of pressure to get the farm bill passed so that none of these programs lapsed, because all of the safety net programs. So the farm economy was in a recession, even though the general economy wasn't in 2018. And then we go into the guidance and interpretation phase, which would happen from 2024 to 2028 if we did get a farm bill in 2023. Any questions on any of this stuff? Okay. And here's how we're going to stir the pot. 2022 election happening just before the farm bill is developed. How do you guys think that's going to stir the pot?
Well, what if some of the senators, they were in all those listening sessions and reports and analysis, what if they voted out? Because we know a lot of them aren't going to run it. I shouldn't say a lot. We know some.
But at least one is. I mean, we have at least one major player that it has said they are not going to run again.
Who is that?
I'm trying to remember the name now.
I
I'm
want to think
blanking.
Grassley, but I know it's not.
No, it's not
Because
Grassley.
Grassley is running again. I think that's.
Yeah, no, I'm blanking on who it is, but I'll think of it
That's okay.
in a minute. It's not one of the big four. So election could really stir the pot. And then we would have to see if these are the folks who are setting the priorities in this farm bill. And so if that senior leadership changes, it rearranges the priorities in this farm bill completely. So what are the 12 titles of the farm bill? What are we actually combining together into this cohesive omnibus policy? The oldest one is commodities. This is the original. This is why it's Title I. It's the original title in the Farm Bill. I may have to go draw like a picture of them or something. Then we go into the conservation title. Okay, so this is where a lot of our soil health, this is going to get a lot of discussion in this Farm Bill. Do you guys know why the conservation title is going to get a lot of discussion in this Farm Bill?
Climate change.
Yeah, because of
Climate change and carbon markets. Are they going to be addressed in the Farm Bill? Or are they going to be addressed outside of the Farm Bill? That's the question right now.
What do you think?
I
As it
think
relates to carbon markets specifically.
carbon markets will probably be addressed outside of the Farm Bill. Because I think we're seeing too much movement in that space right now in terms of bills being introduced. I could be totally wrong. They might fold it into the Farm Bill. But I would not be surprised if we saw at least a preliminary bill in carbon markets ahead of, and this is not unusual. Sometimes a bill will pass before the Farm Bill, and then it will be amended through the Farm Bill to help refine it. This isn't unusual. You could take the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2018 that passed in January. It brought cotton and rearranged dairy prior to the Farm Bill debate. It's one of the reasons that people are pretty sure the Farm Bill in 2018 passed as quickly as it did, is because they had already addressed the two big kind of elephants in the room of, are we going to bring cotton back into the Farm Bill? And what are we going to do with dairy programs, which were not working well at that time? So we already saw an example of that with the Bipartisan Budget Act, followed by the Farm Bill in 2018.
Something that dealt more with carbon that was handled separately. I would assume that would absorb a lot of other industries other than just agriculture, right?
I would think so.
And so do you think there's a chance that agriculture could get the short end of the stick in that? Could it be a wider committee? Like their focus would be agriculture, because obviously like, they have other industries to think of.
That's a good question. I think at this point, they want agriculture as a player at the table, because right now the emphasis is on voluntary programs. And you need farmers to be, you can't short farmers if you want them to be voluntary participants.
Do you think that's
in the
right
carbon market
space to make agriculture a player? Is like thrown in with all the other industries?
I think if you consider how large, so because it depends on how you're defining agriculture, right? Where do you draw the line where you say agriculture ends? Does it go all the way through the big food processors and distributors and retailers and everybody who depends all the way back on agriculture? A lot of the big companies that are creating individual carbon markets right now are dependent on agricultural producers as either their inputs or as their customers. So again, if you're kind of going a voluntary industry-based program, you've got a lot more motivation for cooperation and not really shorting anybody if they're very dependent on each other in that structure. So let's say we take somebody like Land O'Lakes and their voluntary program. Of course, they're maybe not the best example because they're a producer-owned cooperative. But if you take one of these big companies that is implementing voluntary carbon management practices and they're wanting to purchase carbon credits from agricultural producers, they have a whole lot of motivation to not short out the farmers and ranchers in doing that. Am I saying that it will absolutely happen that way? No, I'm not. Who knows what could happen? That particular market is very much in its infancy in the discussion of how it would work, how they would measure, who would be in charge of making sure that it's overseen and regulated in an appropriate way. We don't have any of those answers at this point. we have these examples of individual companies who have created these private partnerships. But we don't have this public-private partnership to look to for an example right now. So I don't really know the exact direction it could go. All I can tell you is the way the wind is blowing right now. And the wind is blowing in the direction of voluntary, public-private partnership, cooperative kind of markets.
So does livestock fall under Title I commodities then?
Yeah, so livestock is a really interesting example because livestock is scattered through the entire Farm Bill. Emergency programs for livestock and dairy are both occur under Title I. But then, you also will find that in miscellaneous title is where you have a lot of the disease and pest control programs that affect livestock. So, of course, you've got livestock risk management insurance under the crop insurance title. So livestock scatters in a lot of places. And there's been a lot of discussion of, in one Farm Bill, we had a livestock title in the Farm Bill. We don't have a livestock title at this point. I haven't heard any conversation that they're wanting to develop a livestock title in this Farm Bill. So we'll see. But if they try to address any of the public information, market transparency stuff in the Farm Bill, and again, I'm not really hearing that they're going to at this point, then you might see something pop up under the Farm Bill in terms of additional programs or some kind of livestock title. I haven't heard anything in that direction.
So kind of following
This
up on
point.
what you said, what all is included under miscellaneous? Like, is it mostly just disease traceability and whatnot, or what are some players?
It's a bit of a potpourri. So
Okay.
it does have some of the, like I said, those livestock related things. It also has beginning farmer and rancher programs. It has some organic agriculture in it, in addition to the horticulture title. It is a bit of a potpourri
Okay.
in the miscellaneous title. Some small ruminants are addressed in there. It's pretty much the only place you'll really find much associated with small ruminants. Okay, let me check the time. See how much of this video we're able to actually watch. Okay. So we're gonna watch maybe just the opening comments.
Say good morning. The Subcommittee of Livestock and Foreign Agriculture will now come to order.
So these are, remember I said there were listening sessions that were happening right now? They have a listening session for each one of those bills we just talked about. They've already had conservation. They have had commodities. This is the Title IV international trade, or I'm sorry, Title III international trade conversation. Title IV is nutrition.
Around the world. So we hope that we're going to have some additional funding to protect American people, but that's not the subject of this morning's hearing. The subject of this morning's hearing is a review of the Farm Bill as we set the table for next year's reauthorization, focusing today on international trade and food assistance programs. And it could not be more timely for a number of reasons. The fact is, the efforts to ensure that America agriculture, which it has traditionally done, provides the sort of support, not only to feed all of our people, but to also help in places of the world where there is hunger and food insecurity has been a tradition of previous farm bills. So we're going to look at that. The subcommittee will receive testimony from the witnesses today. We have two panels of very good witnesses, and with consultation of the ranking member pursuant to Rule 11E. I want to make members of the subcommittee aware that other members of the full committee will join us today. They're always welcome. We appreciate their participation. With that said, I will begin with my opening statement.
So generally how the structure of these work, it's an opening statement by the majority partner, sorry, the majority party, and then the ranking member will make a statement. And then sometimes the general committee chairmans will make a statement as well. These are the subcommittee chairmans.
Within the Farm Bill. These programs are important for multiple reasons. They open up growing markets for high quality American food and agriculture. They save lives. They build local agriculture and food systems in developing economies, and they strengthen our foreign relations to advance shared values. It's the oldest democracy in the world, still a beacon of light. These shared values that we have that begin with human rights and the democratic institution that protects those human rights, our freedoms that we hold most dearly. I think all of you know, I like to say as a third generation farmer, so my primary source of income, that food that we grow in America is a national security issue. We don't always look at it that way, but I think maybe at the beginning of the pandemic, closure of restaurants and schools, people began to realize and see some scarcities and grocery shelves that in fact we can't take it for granted. The hardworking American farmers, ranchers, dairymen and women, farm workers every day do so much with less than 4% of the nation's population to put that food on America's dinner table every night. Let us never, ever take it for granted. And not only can we feed America with the highest quality of products, most nutritious products, and we every day we work hard to make it better at the most cost-effective level. Although we know this inflationary spiral we're in right now is impacting the cost of those groceries. The fact is, nobody, as that song goes, does it better than the American farmer, and as stewards of our environment as well. Obviously, I'm very passionate about that from my own experience. But the fact is we got problems. I wanted to send a copy of the story that I thought was very good. I bring it to your attention. I urge you to look at it. The title this morning is Russia's War on Ukraine. We see the storm coming, and the U.S. struggles to contain a deepening global food crisis. And that's in part why we want to have this subcommittee hearing here this morning. Putin's war in Ukraine has been horrific. And I think we all have a very personal feelings about what we've seen and the courageous Ukrainian people fighting for their independence and their sovereignty. He is a pariah. I think he's a war criminal. But the fact is that the devastation that he was playing upon the people of Ukraine is a wake-up call for all of us, I think. And I think he's, in a strange sort of way, has brought us together. We didn't get together before this, but I think we'll see continuing themes from the testimony of our witnesses and the questions that we asked about what this means. We've already seen the disruption of global grain and fertilizer markets. We've seen a significant downstream effect on countries reliant on Black Sea trade. And for this reason, I sent out a letter to many of my agricultural colleagues requesting that the USDA and the USAID use resources available in Bill Emerson's Humanitarian Trust to help address food insecurity. Trust is one of many vital farm programs that we look forward to hearing about today from our witnesses. But I believe that, and I've had conversations, I certainly my colleagues have with the Secretary of Agriculture and folks at the USDA, that we're going to have to look at other resources, the Commodity Credit Course Conservation Program, and others to provide funding to optimize American farmers and ranchers to use their land and resources that allows for surplus production in various commodities, especially in our grain and wheat areas that many countries don't have. Through the international food assistance programs, only make up a fraction of the percent of our federal budget. Americans still lead global donations and share bounty through the Farm Bill programs like Food for Peace, McGovern Dole, and Food for Progress. And so I think a common view, I believe, that we share is a moral obligation. Provide leading nations to provide assistance to countries in need. And there are certainly people who need our help. According to the USDA's International Food Security Assessment from last summer, before the invasion of Ukraine, a number of food insecure people in 2021 was estimated to be at 1.2 billion people. 1.2 billion people, there's 7 billion people plus on the planet. So think about that. That's almost 20%. And that increase was due to a lot of factors, including COVID-19 and climate-related disasters and conflict. And conflict, of course, is bearing on us now. Past few years have made it clear that the global integrated food system has some cracks. And I want to hear ideas from our two panels and from members of the committee on how we can deal with some of those cracks. The vulnerabilities as climate change continues to impact our production systems. Exchanging technical knowledge with partnering countries, such as the Farmer to Farmer program, the Berlin Cochrane fellowships, I think can be helpful in food insecure nations, make them more food efficient. But food is just one assistance that agriculture connects us globally. And I think the Farm Bill trade promotion programs are something else that we need to think about in terms of next year's farm reauthorization. Market access program has had a tremendous benefit. It never reached the country. I know it has in California. We are very strong advocates of the market assistance program. Foreign market development programs, FMD, is also helpful for U.S. producers to develop commercial relationships and facilitate agricultural trade. In addition, we're going to have to deal with the supply chain issue. It's still a problem. And these empty containers are not good. We've got two bipartisan pieces of legislation that many of us are supporting. Congressman Hagerman's got that piece of legislation. We hope to get it worked out here that will deal with the demurrage issue and the delay issue on the empty containers. And I've got legislation on antitrust provisions. So it's kind of an all of the above approach. These programs work when they work. We need them to work more efficiently. They contribute to local growth and to agricultural support. Maintaining and deepening relationships is a vital part of engendering economic development, shared values, and building future markets for American agriculture. So the two objectives that are advanced by the Farm Bill's Title III programs are not mutually exclusive in my mind. I think they're complementary. And I'd like to hear our witnesses give their thoughts on that. So we look forward from hearing them on the full spectrum of Title III program.
Okay, let's pause right there. Anything in there strike you guys? I know he speaks very monotone, so I don't know how much you like pulled out of that. But anything in there strike you guys? It's being like, whoa, I didn't even think about that being an issue that's addressed in the Farm Bill. Food insecurity in other countries specifically.
I didn't realize that the hunger rate was that high. And nearly 20% of the global population. That's insane.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. So the two imperatives inside this title, which is part of less than 1% of the spending in the Farm Bill, is trade promotion for US products and addressing food insecurity in other countries, with the idea that by addressing food insecurity in other countries, we are contributing to a better world, a better market, and greater stability in other regions, because food insecurity is one of the major reasons for political and cultural stability in other regions around the world. It attributes to wars. Food insecurity results in wars in other countries. So anything else in there strike you guys?
He's a third generation farmer.
Mm-hmm.
Did not expect that.
A lot of your agricultural committee members do actually come from farm backgrounds. Either they are still actively involved in farming, or they have family that's involved in farming, or they come from farm backgrounds. And people tend to be attracted to committees that speak to their districts. And so you get people coming from districts that have greater amounts of agriculture, which just increases the likelihood that they've been involved or touched by agriculture in some way themselves. Although we know agriculture looks very different in different parts of the country, certainly. Okay, so we're going to go ahead. The next section is a little bit shorter. So how this works is the chairman of the subcommittee gets more time to speak than everybody else, so he has the longest speech of anybody.
And delivering on their mission. The witnesses on our two panels have impressed these amount of
providing them an avenue for their hard-earned yields. But also, I think, sir, you're right. Now, when you talk about shared values, clearly these Title III programs can. They can help to advance shared values. And Title III is not perfect, and I think as we understand amid a pandemic, ongoing conflict, and weather-related disasters, it's good for us to have hearings like this so that we can look forward to what does Title III need to look like, not just today, but in the next Farm Bill as well. As we talked, sir, before the hearing, and you had noted that political article, and I too thought it was prescient. I thought it was on target for today. We see the storm coming.
What do you guys think? Do you
We
see the
see
storm coming?
And we know that the
Do you
war
agree
in
with that?
Ukraine is adding shocks to an already fragile supply chain and is exacerbating inflationary pressure. I think we do see a storm coming. I think we see a global food crisis that could be every bit as dangerous as those we saw in 2007 and 2008. And I think we're looking forward to hearing from our witnesses about are there things that we can do to be more resilient, to be more prepared, to try to shave off the most jagged edges of that storm that we see coming. And of course, I'm pleased.
So I'm going to stop right there because that is a fascinating statement about agricultural policy development in general. So resilience, the conversation around resilience, the conversation around vulnerabilities in our supply chain, and we've seen them, right? We've seen them in recent years. This idea that agricultural policy can shave off the jagged edges when a storm is coming. What do you guys think of that as a purpose of policy? You guys have been learning about policy for most of a semester now. What do you think of that as a purpose of policy?
Kind of like soften the blow of maybe a drought to a producer. I mean, in agriculture, like they mentioned, like we see the storm coming, but in agriculture, you're at the mercy of the weather a lot. And so when events like that happen or other events that are just out of your control, policy can serve as a measure to mitigate that.
So risk management, a purpose of policy being risk management. Yeah.
To hear USAID will trigger the Bill Emerson Humanitarian Trust. And I have concerns, I know a number of my colleagues do, about how long it takes those commodities to enter the pipeline. And so can the communities in crisis, can they wait until fall? And hopefully Ms. Charles can educate us more on what that pipeline would look like and when that relief can actually be delivered. And before I close, I wouldn't feel right if I don't mention again how important it is for this administration to prioritize trade, our trading programs, for trading relationships, and as the chairman mentioned, trade promotion programs. And one thing we need to do, our country, is make sure we get the swift nominations of chief ag negotiator, and of course also an USDA undersecretary for trade and foreign agriculture. Both of those positions are needed. They're uniquely positioned to be able to help in this whole suite of conversations we're going to be having today. And frankly, it's hard to imagine a healthy American agricultural sector without new markets, expanded markets, stable markets, and clearly those positions with that. So with that, I welcome our witnesses. I'm excited about it too. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Well, I thank the gentleman from.
You get this language all the
statement
time whenever you
and
listen to
good
these
words.
things, the gentleman from.
And
Makes me laugh a little
to be
bit.
here, but
Considered very polite
and I
there.
appreciate all the good work. he
I probably
does
shouldn't laugh about.
in providing leadership for our committee, and as common courtesy, we want to provide the ranking member an opportunity to weigh in. As
So this
well
is
for any
GT
open
Thompson
statement he might
that's about to
make.
speak. The cameraman can't find him for like 2 minutes on here. It's just going to bounce around while he tries to find him. But that's who's about to speak is GT Thompson.
A chance to talk with each of you briefly here, but certainly the first panel. Thank you for your leadership. It's times that we're in are difficult times. I think one of the here, unfortunately, is the
It's just,
region
it's a
of-
subcommittee hearing,
But,
so they don't
good morning,
collect the full
everybody,
committee. You don't
and
get as many
my
people.
Thanks
Well, I just meant to see if
to
I
our
can find them.
witnesses for
Oh.
spending
It's
time
not
with
that-
us this
it's not
morning.
that many people
This is a
there.
timely conversation. I look forward to learning
true.
from you and thinking more comprehensively about how we can best move forward. We're
Is
across
that him? No,
the
that's not
geopolitical
him.
strife,
Where is he?
weather-related Disasters, pandemic,
Sure,
related
no one
impacts, and
across
supply chain and inflationary crisis are wreaking havoc on the world, especially affecting those.
Let me just go back to him till I find him.
communities. And there are so many simultaneous emergencies at the moment. So I don't want to take this opportunity, I do want to take this opportunity to extend my appreciation to USDA and USAID and all their partners for their tireless work to feed our world's hungry. You're truly doing God's work, and we thank you for that. And please pass that thanks along to your colleagues that work with you. However, there's much more to do, and that's why this hearing is so important. The review of Title III will allow us to learn what's working, what's not, what isn't, and provide direction as we head into deliberation of the 2023 Farm Bill. And this conversation will also be informed by the crisis in Ukraine. As almost everybody knows, Ukraine is a large producer of grain. Together, Russia and Ukraine supply 26% of global wheat exports, and Ukraine supplies 13% of the world's corn. Ukraine is also the largest global supplier of sunflower oil. Russia is a major global supplier of fertilizer, ingredients, and oil and gas products. I think we have been meeting with some of the best thought leaders, trying to really map what we will see occur here in the fall. Looking forward to hearing your analysis and assessment of this, but everything we've heard and really leads to a pretty grim conclusion that by this fall, we're going to see significant increase in hunger, starvation, and death by famine. And with that, a destabilization that's going to result in violence and probably an increase in terrorism. When you think about the Middle East, it's
Makes you
almost
guys
half a
excited,
state
huh?
from
for this
Ukraine,
fall?
and these farmers are now on the front lines defending the nation and the lack of supply of diesel fuel. We don't know that winter wheat is going to get harvested. We certainly don't anticipate where, if this continues, where the spring planting will occur. So as a result of the disruption to exports, global commodity markets have spiked and will continue to experience volatility. And this volatility leads to higher commodity prices. But there remain very real concerns over fertilizer and pesticide availability and the skyrocketing costs. So I echo my colleagues and hoping this.
Okay, that's his just finishing up his concluding remarks then at that point. So when I asked the question, what is the tone now? It's changed a lot just in the last 2 months since Dr. Schaefer asked me to put together this lecture. And it's probably going to change a lot over the coming months as situations evolve, as we find out more. But it is just a truth in our country and our political process that crisis tends to bring the two parties together more so than almost anything else. So what will the 2023 Farm Bill look like? 6 months ago, no one would have considered that input costs and risk management for input cost rises would be a discussion in the 2023 Farm Bill. 12 months ago, everyone thought that commodity prices, low commodity prices, would be the primary discussion in this Farm Bill. This is really an evolving discussion that happens across time. I'm gonna bring that back up. So a lot can and probably will happen over the course of the next 2 years, meaning up until the implementation of this next Farm Bill. Will we get a new Farm Bill in 2023? What do you guys think? You think that they will actually pass a Farm Bill in 2023?
I think it might take a little bit.
This is another crisis.
Yeah, so the kind of the crisis situations may take precedence, that it might be a little bit longer
Or,
than that.
and like, maybe I'm wrong here, maybe because like everything is so fluid right now with all these crisis situations, like, well, I don't know, if this is gonna be good for 5 years, so maybe we want to kind of wait till things settle down a little bit before we put this in place.
I think the outcome of this next election will also dictate where we point our direction.
Yeah, I think everything you just said is true. And it creates the complexities that result in our agricultural policy environment. And then, okay, those of you who come maybe from agricultural backgrounds, because the majority of the people I talk to are producers, what does that uncertainty mean for them?
It's scary.
It's scary. Yeah, it's very hard when you have to plan a year to 2 years out for any major change for your operation, maybe even 3 or 4 years out. If you're talking about converting land into grain to take advantage of potentially high crop prices, you're looking 2 to 3 years out until you make that conversion fully happen. There's a lot of conversation in Washington, D.C. right now about whether or not we should be creating incentives to convert land to cropland to help address some of these grain shortages they're talking about. What do you guys think as agricultural economics students? What do you think of that?
I think for the past 25 years, my grandpa's got a check to not convert a piece of land he has from Bermuda grass back into wheatland. So I think it would be kind of ironic if they would switch up on that.
Well, that's the policy world. Things change on a dime. Yeah, you always have to be ready. I mean, farmers and ranchers really do. They always have to be ready to take advantage of what's happening in the market, what's happening in inputs, what's happening in technology. You know, they always have to be ready to be flexible and shift and change. It may not always look that way.
For
But-
the ranching aspect, I really don't see all that flexibility because
Mhm.
there's just so much time put into producing that animal.
Mhm,
You just stay constant and do what you can to manage your land the best that you can.
mhm.
And then whatever happens on the backside, you just gotta roll with it.
But genetics, I think for livestock, it's more genetics is where we see that flexibility and taking advantage.
And you do see a lot more of that
yeah.
taking hold now.
I think you see more of that in the livestock side than in the, I'm sorry, in the genetic side than in the land management side for livestock.
Okay, so you talked about like how policies always change on a dime and how you have to be like flexible and one little
Well,
punches.
policy doesn't change on a dime, but conversation and discussion,
Yeah,
yeah.
precisely. And then he was like, you know, you just like, do the best you can, you take care of what you have.
Mhm.
Do you think that's a lot of agricultural policy? Like the people who are working in it and are enacting it, they're like, oh, this is gonna do X, Y, Z, and this is gonna be so great, blah, blah. And then the producers are just like, we just wanna. Do you think
Mm.
that's true at all? Or no?
I think the committee is made up of elected representatives. They're going to do their best they can to represent the districts that they've been elected from. So, for example, a lot of our agricultural land in Oklahoma falls under Congressman Lucas's district here in the state. And so I get a pretty regular call from his staff that is, what are you hearing? What are people concerned about? How are people reacting to this? If I told you that this is what we're thinking about doing, how do you think people would react? He's on the Science and Technology Committee, so a lot of it's related to investments and research and development, things like that. He's also on the Finance Committee, which is kind of a big committee. So, you know, and that's just an example from Oklahoma. I know my counterparts in ag policy from other states get similar calls from different people who have districts in their states. So I think the critical thing to remember is that they are going to work hardest to keep their district happiest. And that means that if they come from agricultural districts, and most of our agricultural committee members do, that they are going to be listening to what farmers and ranchers are saying. And if farmers and ranchers are like, it ain't broke, don't fix it, then they won't. And that has been true of crop insurance. So crop insurance subsidies come up under discussion every single farm bill. Do we reduce crop insurance subsidies for US farmers? Every farm bill, because crop insurance is one of the big four spending areas for the farm bill. And every time farmers and ranchers, and especially the groups that represent them in Washington, DC, that have lobbying arms, are like, leave it alone. We are at the whim of the weather. We need crop insurance, reasonably priced crop insurance, to help us manage this risk. Leave it alone. And for the most part, they have in the last 2 farm bills. So I think that's just one example of where you see, maybe you get a lot of conversation and questions, that changing on a dime element. But at the end of the day, these farm organizations do provide a lot of pressure to represent the interests of the people in their constituency for that organization, and then also the actual constituency of the members of that committee can exert a lot of pressure as well. Okay. I may or may not get to my second element here. So what are we hearing conversations about right now? These are just some things that I hear a lot of conversations, not just among the political crowd, but among farmers and ranchers. These are things people have questions about right now. How's it going to work? Carbon markets is on that list. How's it going to work? Does this actually benefit me? What do I actually do with this? Do I want to participate in it? What do these contracts look like? What am I actually signing up for if I participate in this? Lots of questions around that space. Sustainability, resilience, competitiveness, transparency, risk management. These are a lot of the things I hear concerns about, mostly from farmers and ranchers. Any of those strike you as you're like, yeah, that's one we need to be concerned about?
I'd say sustainability is going to be a big one that comes into play here pretty soon.
We're hearing a lot of discussion about sustainability. In fact, we're already seeing the forward waves in that a lot of NEFA grants for research is in the area of sustainability and climate smart technologies. And usually that's a little bit of an early indicator of where they're wanting to collect information or create new technologies to implement programs. Any others strike you guys?
Climate change.
Climate change. Yeah.
No, we're not saving that one.
Well, and that's a really broad conversation that covers a lot of ground. So I think here in Oklahoma, anything that addresses incidents of extreme events, extreme weather events, and incentivizing technologies to help mitigate the effects of extreme events like drought are going to be a benefit to us here in the state. So it covers a lot of ground. Climate change covers a lot of ground. Anything else? Okay, so that's all I had on sort of this forward-looking, this environment. If anybody, does anybody want to learn something about policy careers? Anybody think about going into policy careers? Okay, I'm going to take like 10 minutes and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about policy careers. So I spent 7 years in the U.S. Department of Agriculture before coming to OSU. I spent 2.5 of that, thereabouts, almost 3 in Washington, D.C., and about 4.5 in Fort Collins, Colorado. I worked for both a research agency and a regulatory agency. So whenever you work for the government, you can think about kind of political dramas that you see on TV. Working for the government isn't exactly like that, except you do spend a lot of time talking. That is the difference. I think that's the similarity. So a typical workday, if you're working in a policy career, is something like doing analysis and projections, doing data set management, writing regularly released reports, doing targeted timely research, and being lots and lots and lots of meetings. So if you work as a staff member, for example, you're going to be in lots and lots and lots of meetings, and you're going to be reading lots and lots and lots of reports and summarizing them for the person that you're working for, or for the committee that you're working for, or for the organization that you're working for. And so lots and lots of summarization there. If you work inside one of the federal agencies, you're more likely to be the person actually generating the reports that the staff members are summarizing. And then you're going to have ad hoc responsibilities. This is where it does get a little bit like the political dramas you see on TV, because you have this tiny little window of time to respond to something, sometimes just a couple of hours to respond to a request that you get from a staffer or that you get from a senior leader inside your organization. Lots and lots of written and verbal communication with stakeholders, senior leaders, industry, general public. It is absolutely critical to know how to communicate effectively and professionally if you're going to work anywhere in the policy realm. Also, some technical support. I'm not going to worry about that too much. Communication, all types, all day. You're always on as a federal employee. You are always a representative of whoever you're working with. And I think that's something to just bear in mind as how you carry yourself as a professional, how you speak, even in your off hours, can reflect on your position and on you as a professional when you're working in Washington, D.C. Think and think again before you speak, email, or text, because particularly if you're working for the federal government, everything you write or text can be subject to the Freedom of Information Act. So that's something really important to remember. Make sure it's something you're willing to stand by a day or a week or a year ahead of time in your future. It's okay to say, I don't know, I'll get back to you with an answer. That was probably my most common answer whenever I would just get a cold call from someone with information, because I wanted a little bit of time to go back and just double check my facts. And nobody minds an hour's delay, and then you call them back with an answer. Typically, whenever you graduate, you've had pretty limited experience writing about technical information for a non-technical audience. You've either had non-technical writing experience or technical writing experience, but less experience taking technical writing and interpreting it for a non-technical audience. And so that can be something that you have to learn on the fly a little bit. You're kind of immersed in the language of the science, if you will, while you're getting your degree. So if you're talking about something related to agronomy or related to chemicals, you're used to using the chemical names and things like that. And sometimes you have to, and I do not like the phrase dumb it down. You will not ever hear me say anything about dumbing something down, because these are very, very smart people and they'll know you're doing it. But I would say learning how to communicate effectively in a non-technical way is really important. And it's a bit of an art form. Every position's a little bit different. But when it comes to policy communication, don't go rogue. Whatever you do, you may think you're like, oh, I'll just handle it. No problem. And you don't let your supervisor know. And then your supervisor finds out from somebody else that you did, that particular communication to an outside group. There's nothing wrong with just quickly being like, can I call you back in an hour? I just like to cross-check some facts. You call up your supervisor, say, hey, so-and-so just called me with this question. Are you cool with me just answering it this way? That's just fine. Do you have to learn policy communication in a trial by fire? Yes and no. And there are certain things you just don't learn until you've actually experienced them. I think that's the reason internships are so good if you're going to work in this area, because you're given a mentor and able to work alongside somebody. But the important thing to remember is that you're never alone. If you're working inside one of these organizations, you don't have to just figure it out. You're going to be part of a team. You're going to have a supervisory line that's very clear, and they will help you navigate through any tricky policy situations that you have. So some ways to practice policy communication: you can shadow someone for a chance to watch them, to watch their writing skills or communication skills. You can attend state industry policy meetings and watch somebody from American Farmers and Ranchers, American Farm Bureau, Oklahoma Cattlemen's actually speaking about policy issues. It's a great way to get that experience of how to effectively communicate, and also to see examples of people who don't effectively communicate. And you're like, yeah, no, I'm not going to do that one. I like how this person presents information. Test out your skills. If you are working on a paper or something, turn around and talk to it about somebody who's never had any exposure to that topic at all, maybe somebody from another major, and see if they understand what you're working on. Interview people with the types of positions you're interested in. It doesn't have to be a formal internship. If somebody's just working in a job that you think is interesting, contact them and say, hey, can I just talk to you? about your job and what you do and what your daily work looks like, maybe even could I shadow you for a day? Most people, unless they're in a really, really sensitive position, are very happy to at least talk to you or even let you shadow them for a limited period of time, even if it isn't a formal internship. You can also compete. So some of our professional associations have competitions. For example, our American Ag Econ Association has a policy brief competition. We also have an extension program competition. And you can bring in guest speakers to your student association meetings or attend events on campus to watch other people speak in order to find the things that you really appreciate or don't appreciate in how somebody else does policy communication. And then the final thing I'll say is just for those of you who are interested in working in this area, when you work for the government or in the policy sphere, you have an opportunity to have a really direct impact on the lives of people. You have the opportunity to actually make generational change potentially happen in the country. Maybe it's you have a small piece of that, but it's really powerful and impactful to be able to say, hey, I was a part of that. I did that. And I think that that was probably one of the things that I appreciated most about my time as a federal employee. Any questions about that part of it? No? Okay. Well, don't tell me if you think I'm an effective policy communicator. I can't take it today. Too many fires. This is my contact information. If you guys have any questions, if you think you might like to work on an undergraduate research project or anything like that, please let me know. I do mentor undergraduate research scholars, even though I don't teach in the classroom. So if you have some interest in that area, please contact me. Otherwise, you are free. You're welcome. Stop recording.